Good afternoon. Let me welcome everyone to this interesting public event where we shall have a conversation about competition and cooperation. My name is Gabor Halász. I am a professor emeritus of ELTE University and also a senior research fellow of the Learning Institute of MCC, where I am leading a program called Learning from Asia. And we have two guests here, and I think that the simplest is if I am asking them to introduce themselves. So let's start. Aisi.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aisi. I live in Budapest and I teach in Nazarbayev University in Kazakhstan, in person and remotely. Before that, I was a full-time faculty member in the same school, the Graduate School of Education in Nazarbayev University. And I teach, or I'm still teaching educational leadership with a special focus in higher education. And I received my undergraduate, my BSc in business management in China. And then I moved to Britain to study comparative and international education in the University of Oxford, followed by a DPhil in educational studies in the same university. I was asked to talk about briefly my activities in Oxford. So I was very active in both academic and social life. I won several awards, for example, Oxford Society Award. I was also a 4-time winner of my college's Master Coaching Fund in public speaking. And I was very enthusiastic about sports. I was with the fencing team. I used to fence for Oxford against Cambridge. And then I dropped after that for many years. I was also elected social secretary for my residence college. I was the first Chinese to be elected into a student body in the college's over 700-year-old history. And that followed by the same position, social secretary for the fencing team. And I did a lot in Oxford. If you were interested, then I'm very happy to have a conversation with you afterwards. But I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, I see. Márta?
Yes, I am Márta Fülöp and I am a professor of psychology. I have two full-time jobs. One is in the Institute of Cognitive Neuroscience and Psychology, Research Center of Natural Sciences, which may sound a little bit strange for a psychologist who deals with social and cultural psychology. And I am a scientific advisor there in the institute, and I chair the social and cultural psychology research group. And I have another job, and it's being a professor of social and cultural psychology in Károly Gáspár University of the Reformed Churches. And there I teach psychology and culture, and I teach also the psychology of competition, because not even after finishing university, already my master thesis at ELTE, Eötvös Loránd University, was about competition. So I have been a researcher of competition all in my life, and as you can imagine, this means several decades of doing research on competition. And I have studied competition from many different aspects. But one main aspect of my studies was the cultural differences in competition. And another main aspect is how competition relates to cooperation and constructive and destructive competition and cooperative competition. And why I started to be interested in cultural differences, because I wanted to see different cultures where they are able to combine cooperation with competition. So I got a research scholarship from the Japan Foundation So I went to Japan with my whole family, with 3 kids and my husband, and I did research on how Japanese conceptualize competition. And in the last now 14 years, I have been an invited guest professor in Beijing for the summer school of the University of International Business and Economics. So I have been teaching Chinese students for the last 14 years, and this also opened up the opportunity to do research with my Chinese students. So that is, and I have been involved in many international cooperative studies, and I have done research on competition in several other countries. I am in fact Secretary General of the International Association for Cross-Cultural Psychology. I have been Secretary General of this association for 8 years now. And I was also Deputy Secretary General. I was responsible for the doctoral dissertation award awarded by the International Association for Cross-Cultural Psychology. I am also president of the Children's Identity and Citizenship European Association currently, and I have been involved in this association and related to that several European Union programs supported by Erasmus and supported by the Jean Monnet program of the European Union. So I have been doing research on cultural comparative works for a long time. And it's very interesting because when I listen to Aisi, her achievements are fantastic, but if you listen to it as a competition researcher, award first, competition on fencing, and so on. So how you build up your life, why I started to be interested in how you build up your life around, for instance, competitive achievements. You see that you narrate your life and then you narrate it with what kind of awards you won, what kind of acknowledgements you gained, and these are always based on comparison and competition. So it was very nice that it was a kind of introduction also to our topic, and so I was listening to it with admiration, but also with a kind of smile, but because this is how it is. And when I started to be interested in competition as a university student, basically that was my understanding, that somehow competition is so much present in our life and we still don't identify it in almost every activity that we do. And I thought it would be nice to pay attention to it more. Okay, so that's it.
Thank you, Márta. Your achievements are also admirable, as we could hear. Well, you already started touching upon some elements of the core of our conversation. Let's first stay at that level, the general level. So let's talk a little bit more about competition and cooperation as human behavior. So what are the advantages? What are the disadvantages of these two behaviors? When should we compete? When should we cooperate? So let's discuss a little bit this at this general level. And maybe you could also bring in more personal stories, experiences related with this topic.
First of all, cooperation and competition, they are basic behaviors in our social life. So they are both part of the social dynamic that is going on among people. But of course, cooperation and competition, you cannot only interpret at the individual level, you can interpret it at the group level. Group groups cooperate with each other, groups compete with each other. You can interpret it at the international level. Nations compete and cooperate with each other. So cooperation and competition are social phenomena that you can study at different levels. Of course, my main study is concentrated on the individual level. And you can start with evolutionary psychology. So from evolutionary biology point of view or perspective, these are both behaviors that serve our survival and a kind of very end point or end
Do
goal.
even animals compete and cooperate?
Absolutely, both. They do both. And there are so-called evolutionary developmental psychologists who already, at a very young age, they observe how children basically combine cooperation and competition. And their interpretation is that, in fact, cooperation is the most advantageous competitive strategy. So they think that we cooperate when it brings us more advantage than when we just simply compete. So cooperation is a competitive strategy according to these researchers. You asked when it is good to compete, when it is good to cooperate. So I think this really can be approached from what is the best strategy to reach your goal. And depending on, you apply one or the other. And the goal can be individual, but the goal can be at the group level as well. So not only, so you can sometimes, and not sometimes, in fact, quite a number of times, you can say, now I give up, or I don't fully follow my individual goal in order to help the group to reach the goal, meaning that you cooperate with the group, but then your group is the winner, so the advantages of your group being a winner gets back to you as an individual and gives you also an additional advantage. Probably I hope you understood that from this point of view, not always people look at their individual goals, but they look at the group's goals, because the group's goals may bring more advantage than simply just pushing through your individual goals. So depending on also, both cooperation and competition, they can take many forms. And they can take forms that are really advantageous, but they can take forms which are really destructive. And partly my goal as a university student when I decided to do research on competition was how you can identify the conditions which lead to a destructive competition and which lead to a constructive competition. And is it possible to turn a destructive competition to become a constructive competition? And to tell you honestly, I have been doing research on this for a long time, and of course I have some recommendations, but looking around us in the world, I don't think I have been very successful to put through these ideas how you can turn around the destructive competition to be constructive. And just going to the cooperation issue, people think cooperation is good. Cooperation is beautiful. People are nice with each other if they cooperate. But in fact, it is very simplistic, because cooperation can be also destructive. For instance, if you are nicely cooperating in a criminal act, you are fully cooperating, but what do you cooperate about, for instance? Also, how cooperation is going on within a group. Of course, when we turn to the educational context, this will be also issues, because sometimes cooperation means that 3 are working and 5 not. So how you make sure that cooperation is really fully implemented. These are also, so cooperation is not simple at all as well. And if it means that somebody really takes the load and carries it and others are not, and that means cooperation, that's destructive, not constructive. So there is no simple yes and no answer, what is good and what is bad, depends on what kind of, and for what goal, what is the content, and what are the means that you apply in it. So that's.
I wonder what you think about those questions.
I find it very difficult to talk about it after Márta, someone who is a prominent researcher in this field. So can I use my personal experience just to elaborate it? And one thing I find it very interesting is when you are with a researcher in a specific field, like for example, being a close friend, a colleague, or being the children of a researcher, what you see is a concept and theories on the other person's faces. Just what, like Márta said, she saw when she heard the things I said, a lot of it was about her research and the concepts and coming out on her mind. Now, going back to what Gabor asked about the benefits, the drawbacks, and should we or should we not cooperate or compete, it's such a complex question that I don't think I can answer it in one sentence. So from my personal experience, just thinking back how I grew from a child to an adult, my closest, my best friend, my longest time friend was also my biggest competitor in school, in a highly competitive Chinese middle school from the age of 13. So that actually goes to why and when and what are the benefits of cooperating and competing. We have been competing throughout our lives, but it was not really about who is better in the sense of, for example, material sense, who is better, but it was more about can I learn from you? Is there anything that I find that's really valuable in you that I can learn from? And how we progress through this mutual learning and comparing. And I found that in us, we had the chemistry. It doesn't apply to everyone. It doesn't apply to every friendship, particularly when you are placed, when the children were placed in a competitive situation. But we found that immensely valuable, and it enhanced each other's competencies and confidence. So for me, I could see huge benefits of both cooperation and competition. But there's a but in it, because throughout this process, this growth process, there were a lot of interventions. Like, we didn't just realize it was good to learn from each other. There were interventions, and the interventions, most of it came from the teachers, because we got to know each other in school. And secondly, it came from the parents, and then from a broader community, the students' community that we live with. So it's not a very simple good or bad, and when does it happen? I would describe it as organic, with a lot of very wise intervention in the process.
You mentioned that in your introduction, you mentioned that you were in a business school.
University.
Could you say a few words about what you were learning and what you were taught in the business schools? How the world of business is different from other spheres?
Do you mind if I answer the question first?
But I wanted to relate to this directly now, and I am a little bit afraid if we go to business school, then it will go away. So is it possible to keep a little bit the question? Because what I want to say, again, I was just smiling. I was just smiling because, first of all, she is Chinese. I am Hungarian. And if you ask me why I started to be interested in this topic of competition, I had a very good friend in the high school, and we were very best friends, and we were competing with each other, exactly the same experience. And then I went to study psychology at Eötvös Loránd University, and I started to study about cooperation and competition in social psychology, American social psychology. And I started to read that you either compete or you cooperate. And these are opposite things, and one is good and one is bad. And I was thinking, what? Because I had exactly the same experience what you had, that it was both a highly cooperative and a highly competitive relationship. Then how come that these psychologists get to this conclusion? So I started to work on it, and I have been working on this all in my life. But the other thing what is extremely interesting, I told you I went to Japan to find out how you can combine cooperation with competition. And I found how Japanese conceptualized competition, and Aisi described the result of my study. That it's about improvement, mutually improving each other, learning from the rival, growing together, progressing. I mean, all the words you see. And Judith, she's working with me, and we analyze currently as well Chinese data and so on and so on. And Judith was looking at me and nodding because she understood that we both understand that Aisi is telling us our research results. I mean, that how you can conceptualize, you see, competition and how it can be very well going together with cooperation. So sorry, Gabor, that's why I wanted to relate to this, because if we go towards the business life, you see it takes away this kind of very personal, interesting thing that we come from two completely different societies. We are not the same age group, but our personal experience was exactly the same. Friendship, which also was competitive. I was also a good student, and my friend was also a very good student. And from this point of view, it was very important that two good students were inspiring each other while competing, while being the best friends. Of course, this requires certain qualities of the competitive relationship, that you, for instance, don't do ugly things against the other in the competition, because then it gets out of hand. But that's another issue. So now the business school. So that's...
Sorry for the spoilers of showing the findings of your research. Going back to business school, what I learned from business school when I was undergrad, that was a long time ago, just looking back, more than 20 years ago. So I need to give some context when I talk about what I have learned in that particular time. So that was in the late 90s in China, and the Chinese economy was officially transiting from a plan to market. So it was very much the beginning of a full-on market economy and privatization. And it was also a very difficult time for the Chinese economy at that time, because you saw, if you read about it, there was the global financial crisis. There was a whole very high unemployment rate in China. There were a lot of collapse in huge previously state-owned enterprises. So economically, there was both crisis but also opportunities. So that was the context. Now, what did we talk about competition in business school at that time? So one takeaway from that study was, do not kill your competitor. That was my takeaway from business school. Do not kill your competitor. And why? Because healthy competition, or to use Márta's words, constructive competition contributes to the growth and advancement of the other individual and ultimately perhaps the whole society. So one thing that from the planned economy, I was told as a student, as written in the reading and also by the professors, one lesson from the planned economy was the complete lack of competition. And as a result, from individual level to the enterprises level to the state level, people didn't know where they stood. And there was a lack of motivation exactly because of people didn't know where they stood, their position in the society. So keeping your competitor in a short leash, keeping them healthy, keeping the competition healthy, can also inspire your own business, your own enterprise to grow, to be better in a comparison, and we can grow in that way collaboratively together.
This is extremely interesting. Well, we have already touched upon the cultural dimension. So that's a key element of Márta's research, that you were comparing, or you are comparing different Asian countries with the West. In your life story, we can see that you have been living in different worlds. So both of you have lots of cross-cultural experiences. So could we talk a little bit about that? So how Western and how Eastern cultures are different regarding the thinking about competition and cooperation?
First of all, as I said, I was interested in how the concept of competition is constructed culturally, and I did research comparing North American, Canadian, and US respondents, Japanese respondents, and Hungarian respondents, and because I really wanted to see how it is conceptualized in the people's mind. In all countries, many years ago, my questionnaire was open-ended. So it was a question, what do you think about competition in general? And then students, teachers, they gave free responses to this question. And then we content analyzed these responses. I wanted to do this because at that time when I went to Japan, there were some questionnaires already available on competitive and cooperative attitudes. With my eyes now, and taking into consideration the research that has gone since then, they were extremely simplistic and based on this kind of dichotomic view of cooperation and competition. And they were American questionnaires. So I could have done to travel the questionnaire to Japan, distribute it to the Japanese respondents, and I would have got back a kind of construction which is based on the American setup that was in the questionnaires. So I decided to do this kind of open-ended question, and based on the answers, we could identify different functions attributed to competition, and one function was development. I didn't want to say self-development because the Hungarians and the American respondents, they basically concentrated in their answer that I improve by competition, I myself. So the self improves. But the Japanese respondents, very, very frequently, they didn't say I improve, they said we mutually, they used the word mutually improve by competition. Now, this improvement answer was available in all three groups, but the highest frequency of this answer was among the Japanese respondents. It was much lower among the American and even lower among the Hungarian. Now, the second function that was attributed by the respondents in their answers to competition was motivation. This was very high in all three countries. The interesting thing was, again, if it is related to the self, I am motivated by the other, or we mutually motivate each other, and again, this was the Japanese type of answer. It is mutual. So not only I improve the other, motivate the other person also motivates me. It's a joint process. Now, a third function was goal attainment. That the function of competition, that if there is a goal and there is no other way to reach it but entering a competition, for instance, I want to get a scholarship which is competitive, I have to apply. You see, I have to enter it in order to reach my goal and, for instance, get a Japanese scholarship or whatever. So So goal attainment. This was very, very characteristic to the American respondents. A kind of pragmatic thing that if there is a goal I want to reach and there is no other way but competing with others, I do compete in order to reach my goal. This was much lower, much lower. So the Japanese answer was mainly the improvement, mutual improvement, motivation, mutual motivation, and the Hungarian answer was motivation and goal attainment. And who did I left? And the American was primarily goal attainment, motivation, and then lower the improvement. So what I found that there are different combinations. So all functions appeared in all groups, but with different combinations. And basically that was responsible for the cultural differences. And for instance, the difference where competition is what competition is focused on, the self or both of us. And unfortunately, among the Hungarians was the highest that the focus of competition is the other person, the rival in a negative sense. And the Hungarian answers in Hungarian many times contain a kind of aggressive element as well, that I trample on the, not I trample, but they say in competition people trample on each other, or in competition people use aggression. In competition people want to destroy the rival. So the focus of the competitive process, not even the self, not mutual improvement in a positive way, but a negative focus. The focus is the rival and pushing down the rival. And together with this, of course, you can conceptualize your rival in different way. You can conceptualize your rival as somebody who is an instrument. This was very prevalent among the Japanese answers. An instrument who helps you to improve. So you don't like your rival, you don't hate your rival, you use your rival for your improvement. Another one is the opponent. This was mainly the American, that if you want to reach your goal pragmatically, you have to win over your rival, meaning your rival is an opponent who has to be won over. And the third one is your rival as an enemy that you have to eliminate from the process, get rid of, push down, defeat. And of course, all three, again, were available and were presented in the answers of all three groups. But again, there was a difference in the combinations and the frequency. And this instrumental was the most prevalent among the Japanese. Unfortunately, the enemy was the most prevalent among the Hungarians, and the opponent was the most prevalent among the Americans. So the American answers were not didn't contain an aggressive element, more like a pragmatic, I do it if it has to be done, and I have to win over the other if that means I can reach my goal. But it didn't mean that you use necessarily unaccepted means to win over your opponent. So at that time, I had to learn, which was not a very, very happy learning, that the Hungarian conceptualization, I mean, we all had all the conceptualization everybody has, but as I said, in different proportions. So this destructive competition was the most prevalent among the Hungarian respondents.
On the basis of your rich experiences, both in Asia and China and Europe, how do you see the difference between Chinese and Europeans, both in the way they think about cooperation and competition, and also they behave, their cooperative and competitive behavior, so their thinking and behavior? Do you see strong differences
I'll continue with what Márta just said. I can compare my student life between China and when I was in Britain. So I heard what the words that you said, rival, opponent, enemy. These were such strong words to describe people who are trying to share your resources. And from my experience in China, I saw a lot of contradiction in myself and in the classroom and in the school system, partly because I never saw my classmates as rival or opponents or enemies. I'm saying in general, my classmates, not just my particular good friends. They were my classmates, end of.
Sorry, you are right, because partner, competitive partner, that would be the fourth expression. And in fact, that is the most important from your point of view, from that culture's point of view, the competitive partner. And in fact, that expresses this mutual improvement. So thank you very much, because you reminded me.
Thank you for the academic input in the concept. Thank you. And so to move on from that, and the contradiction I saw was in a very highly competitive examination system, such the one in China, the college entrance examination. Every province or city actually had its own grading system, how you calculate the grade. So where I went through, the grades were not calculated as a simple sum of the 5 subjects you took. It wasn't calculated that way, but it was by percentile, meaning that if you received the highest score in this subject in the whole province, you took it all. You took all 900 points. So it was a ranking. It demonstrated where you stood in the ranking. So in this kind of competition, why would someone have the incentives to help your partners, help the classmates improve? Because if more people share the same grades, then the lower the grade you would get. What you would really want from a very selfish point of view is I wanted to take it all. So I would be the top percentile, and as a result, I would enter one of the top universities in China. But the reality was very contradictory. The reality was we helped each other. We passed around our notes. We tried our best efforts to steal mock exam papers from other schools and even from other provinces in order to try to tackle the most difficult problems. I think partly because through our learning process since a child, we understood subconsciously, the complex questions could not be solved alone. Some complex questions had to be tackled as a team through collaboration. So of that phenomenon, it's still a myth to me, but I did it automatically as a student. As a partners, we learned together. Even though I knew and we knew as a class, as a school, we knew helping your partners, your classmates advance may mean you get a more average or lower score eventually in the exam. Now going back to Britain, just looking back what happened when I was studying Oxford, I think one thing that made me feel really unsettled, and it still makes me feel very unsettled, was I didn't know how to define competition, because there was no explicit competition, particularly coming from the instructor's side. We were a group that was 15 of us in the master's program. We had our own thesis title. We studied in a class, and we went back to our room and we studied. So there was no ranking, because your academic performance was confidential. Nothing was shared. And in that sense, for me, it was very unsettling, because I didn't know how I was doing. And the grades were fail, pass, distinction. There were only 3 grades. So unless a student was in serious trouble of failing, your instructor would not really say anything specific to you. And so that was a very unsettling process. It was very muddy because I didn't know where to put myself. And that went to all the awards I mentioned at the start. And in order to find my place in a country other than my home country, in a place that the language was not my mother tongue, I had to try to see where I could stand. And one way to do it was through putting myself forward, yes, through competition, and see how I compare with my peers, with my friends, and with my partners. And as a result, I could see I wasn't doing too bad, and that gave me a kind of a sense of security. So I'm not sure whether that answers your question about the cultural differences. I can certainly see there was a quite strong different culture when it comes to competition and cooperation between China and in Britain. But that was my experience, that it is a contrast.
Well, I think that Márta, you got an extremely interesting case here, and I wonder how would you reflect to what we heard from us.
First of all, of course, Japan and China, two very different countries, but still there are a lot of similarities as well. And I have a chapter on competition in Japanese schools. And that was also part of my research, that I asked the Japanese students, what kind of role does competition play in the school? And then they described what she just said, that we have to compete, we are ranked, but we are doing it together, we are preparing together. So we are rivals, or thank you for the word competitors, it's a better word for that. We are competitors, but we are preparing for the competition together. And that was extremely interesting again, because referring back to the previous research, basically it stated that if you compete, you become not only an opponent, but many times an enemy. So you never cooperate with your rival, with your competitor. So in a way, when I looked at this, they said that many students said, and this brings us together. So competition didn't break the relationships, but in fact brought them together. So the fact that they knew that when they go to the test and after that they are going to be ranked, and one of them will be at this rank and the other one will be at another rank, but while they were approaching this situation, they were also sharing, learning together, inspiring each other, and so on and so on. And this was what one after another in the open-ended question, and that's why I emphasize these were open-ended questions, because it was not me who gave the different kinds of statements into their mouths, let's put it that way, like in a questionnaire which is closed-ended. Then you have statements and you just have to indicate if you agree or not. But these were their sentences. And what was really interesting, that these sentences came one after another, you see, from different respondents. And now kind of sentences come from Aisi, and we really didn't talk about this ever with each other. So to me, this is absolutely amazing, to tell you honestly. And then the other thing is that what you say, that everybody went back to the room and there was no open comparison. Still, of course, Britain is also very competitive. So finally, of course, you are compared, but you don't cooperate with your rival. You go study alone, go back to your room, you do whatever you think it is necessary to be when you are compared, to come out as the better one, but there is no much sharing. Of course, I don't want to say there is absolutely not. Of course, again, when I speak about Japanese or Chinese or Hungarian, please don't take it word by word, because of course, in in each culture, there is everything, and there are people who are like this, and there are people who are like that. We are talking about more like the major patterns, okay? So that doesn't mean that there are no others who behave like a Hungarian who behaves like you did in the, because I am Hungarian, you see, and we had the very same high school experience, friendship and competition and cooperation. So that means that, of course, we share a lot of things, but the proportion and the major conceptualization is what differs.
Let's come a little bit closer to the world of education. What do you think teachers should know about cooperation and competition, and how they could or they should use this knowledge when they are teaching students?
Okay, I'll go first. So it just felt, it feels like I painted a quite rosy picture of cooperation and competition of my my school days, but it was not that rosy. As Márta mentioned, there is also the destructive side, destructive competition. And very unfortunately, from my own experience, the destructive side of competition from my school days, in fact, came from teachers. If there were any destructive behavior. Luckily, I have enough good teachers, wise teachers, who facilitated, for example, the relationship with my classmates, with my best friends. I'll go from the destructive side first. So one of the very destructive side that I saw of teachers, how they could really intensify competition, was to their own benefits. Because there were, and Gabor researched a lot about teachers in China. So within the teaching community, there were a lot of competitions themselves. For example, your students' performances and how the rate, the percentage of your students that could get into different levels or different types of high school or universities or even overseas. So that there is a competition within the teaching community itself, which comes with all sorts of awards and other rewards. So some teachers, from my experience, they really encourage the kind of intense competition among the students in order to boost the result, so that their annual review, their annual performance look fantastic. And that kind of behavior was very unhealthy in the sense that the students were usually very often openly called that, for example, Aisi performs a lot better than Bimba, or Bimba, you did much better in your English test this time than, this kind of behavior, when it was long, repetitive, it could really harm the socialization, the relationship of the students, and it could certainly harm the psychological health, the emotional health of a teenager. So unfortunately, that was something that I witnessed as destructive in a teaching and learning setting. It usually came from the teachers. Now, wise teachers, from my personal experience, they really facilitated and channeled the sort of energy the students had. Instead of saying that Bimba was performing much better than Aisi, the teacher would sit us down, like me and my best friends, sat us down and said, well, since both of you are very good at doing the task, can you help draw up a plan together and see how we can help the rest of the group improve? Or can you draw a plan together to share your own experience, how you learned, what you have learned, and can you share especially with them how you learn from each other? So that kind of intervention was very necessary in an environment that competition was already very spoken, very, very outright spoken. It really helped settle the students. You find your purpose, your competencies during the whole learning process. When you are very good through comparison, when you are very good, you know where to divert the energy rather than aiming simply at winning and personal gain. But you divert the energy for the students, give them a sort of purpose and responsibility, so that kind of purpose is of a greater good, of advancement, of personal growth, rather than a personal win. Now, one thing that I have learned, and from my teachers, the very good teachers, and actually I also heard it a lot actually from the Japanese TV shows. I watched a lot when I was in school. Was your biggest competitor in life is yourself. You want to be better than yourself. So it's not about being always constantly better than others around you, but it's about who you are and whether in the next time, in a short term, in a long term, whether you can be better than your current self in the future. So that was one of the wise quote I took away from my good teachers in school.
You are a teacher, and listening to you, I was trying to imagine you, how you are using this knowledge in your teaching practice. Could you perhaps say a few words about that? Is this knowledge useful for you? Can you use that kind of knowledge about cooperation and competition?
I did in my classroom. My whole teaching career is in Kazakhstan, particularly in Astana, in one of the most selective university, called Nazarbayev University. I used it, but I have doubts about it, whether I was doing it right. I think we talked about it very briefly yesterday. So this is the thesis submission time of my master's thesis submission time of my students. And this is usually also a period of time that I, in addition to reading through the drafts, giving academic input, I am also a counselor for my thesis students because of the anxiety they have before the thesis submission. And one of my students that came to me very recently broke down in tears. And I asked her what happened. And she said how I felt in Britain. She said, I don't know how I was doing. What I saw was all my peers were doing great. Their presentations was really good. And it seems like they have all finished their thesis, and I haven't even finished fixing my references. So she just broke down in tears. And then I told her that I cannot tell you any information about your peers, specific information, because that's confidential. They're performances. What I want you to know is, if you look at yourself, have you grown? Have you improved compared to 2 years ago when you just enter this program? If you feel that, if you look at your writing, you look at your presentation, you look at your understanding of your research questions, you feel that you have greatly improved, and you feel that you are actually confident to answer your research questions, that is already a huge step for you. It takes time, to taking this kind of information, but yes, I would say I use it. I don't constantly use it because it has to be a very conscious purpose as a teacher, but whenever there is an opportunity, and I do use this kind of knowledge that I learned from my teachers back in high school.
So we were listening to an Asian person, a Chinese person talking about this topic, and I wonder whether, according to what you know about the cultural difference, is she a typical Asian Chinese person regarding her thinking about competition, cooperation, or her behavior as a teacher?
I think she is. I think she is. She is very sophisticated, of course, and very intelligent. And of course, when you describe something, that also counts. So depending on this, the underlying notions can be expressed in different ways. She is very sophisticated when she expresses this, but she is very typical, in my understanding, Of course, I am not an expert of Chinese culture or Japanese culture. I know some, but I am not an expert. But going back to the educational context, what you asked, Gabor, so in an educational context, you can give individual tasks. And in that case, what Aisi said to this student absolutely applies. You solve the problems individually, you learn, and you experience that you improve. And it's very important that you can compare your achievement or learning at a particular point of time with another point of time, and you can experience that, yes, I improved, yes, I learned. And this is very important. This is something that you can rely on and can give you some kind of confidence, as you said, based your confidence on your own improvement from time point 1 to time point 2. But we as individuals, we are always in a social context. So this kind of improvement at the same time is also in comparison with others' improvement. Even if we don't compare ourselves, others compare us. For instance, the teacher compares us. The teacher, not necessarily explicitly, but implicitly for sure, because the teacher sees all the test results, for instance, and can see that this guy is better, this guy is worse. So, and based on that communicates, based on that gives feedback, based on that gives particular tasks. So in fact, even if it is not explicit how you are compared to others, implicitly everybody basically has an idea and does compare spontaneously without competition as an institution. So in that sense, it's also a very important information how I compare, how I improved compared to myself, but how I compare to others. And teachers in the class give individual tasks, but they also give competitive tasks, and they also give cooperative tasks. And this is again very, very different in different countries. We did a 3-country study in Britain, and in Slovenia, and in Hungary. And we observed classes, 2nd grade students and 10th grade students and the teachers. And what we observed how much the teachers give cooperative tasks, how much they give competitive tasks, how they interpret the result, for instance, in case of a competition. What do they say to the winner? What do they say to the loser? How they monitor the process of competition if they give competitive tasks? How they monitor the process of cooperation if they give cooperative tasks? And all 3 countries did this. And then one result was that in England, basically, equally, the teachers give cooperative and competitive tasks. So we can say that students have the experience of competition and also cooperation established as a framework by the educational context. And also, of course, individual tasks, but that was not our particular interest. In Slovenia, the teachers mainly gave cooperative tasks. And in Hungary, the teachers mainly gave competitive tasks. But what was really interesting, that we also had interviews with the teachers about their ideas, what kind of tasks they like to give and why do they give that. And what we found, that while the Hungarian teachers give predominantly competitive tasks, they are highly ambivalent about competition. They are highly ambivalent about giving competitive tasks. And they say, cooperative tasks are the good ones. Cooperative tasks are the positive ones. But they don't give them, but they give the competitive ones, and they are highly ambivalent about those. You also mentioned that competition has destructive aspects, and yes, absolutely. One destructive aspect is cheating. that if you feel that you cannot get the grade or you cannot get to the goal by simply relying on your own resources, or, I mean personal resources or abilities or whatever, people can get out of the rules and cheat. And cheating is destructive. Now, this is something that also appears in an educational context. And for instance, if teachers introduce competitive tasks, they have to have the capacity to monitor it and ensure that the rules are observed and obeyed, and also have to have educational ideas what they say to the students and how they handle if they are not observed. And again, if there are winners, how do you socialize the winner to be a winner who can be happy about and proud of winning, but at the same time can turn to those who are not so good and can acknowledge their achievement as well, or, as you say, even help them to improve. And also how you socialize the loser, for instance, not to give up, not to lose motivation, not to lose self-confidence, but how you encourage a loser who is sad and feels that I am not good enough, how you encourage that you have to continue and you have to believe in improving yourself in spite of being a loser. So all these kind of things are very important educational tasks. And what I found up until now with different kinds of research of mine which went on with educators, most of the time they are not really elaborated about this. So they apply competition, but they don't monitor it systematically, and they don't know how to deal with winning, don't know how to deal with losing. Mostly what they do is based on their own personal experiences, their own competitive and cooperative experiences from their student years, and they have a kind of lay educational attitude towards this, and mostly spontaneously react to these situations, not in a systematically build-up way, which helps students to learn constructive competition and helps students to understand why it is important to compete according to the rules and, for instance, not cheating. So that was my impression.
Gabor, can I add on to what Márta just said? Because you mentioned about the basically it's the curriculum and the pedagogical side of how to manage, implement, manage, understand cooperation and competition. So in my teaching, I try to reflect on that. So the context of the students I teach is, like I said, they are highly selective. They are merit-based, and you can feel when they are in the classroom from day one, they are ready for battle. Right? They come in and you can see that kind of energy. So throughout my almost 10 years in the same school, me and my colleagues, we tried to tone down the competition because that was the system they went through in their secondary schools and undergraduates. So we try to tone down the competition, and we try to emphasize cooperation in the curriculum. For example, in the assessment, we try to emphasize that in the classroom participation, you must listen to your peers, build your understanding and your argument based on what your peers have said, to show respect and to show that you are a good team player. And in teamwork, we always said your teamwork has to be balanced, which would be reflected, for example, in your writing, in your presentation, and also in the overall quality of the work. So I thought I was doing a good job, but until these recent 2 years, I started to doubt whether I was managing the competition side, because the students, of course, they were cooperative in the teamwork, and they try to listen. They try to listen and build their arguments, their opinions on their students, their peers' opinions. But the target was to win. the target was still to be better, than others. So that kind of, I truly doubt whether that kind of genuine cooperation, cooperative learning took place in my classroom. Perhaps over 2 years, so over their master's degree, or perhaps over their PhD degree at certain time of the point, they actually had that moment of, oh, this is true collaboration, because in a moment that I really needed help, my peers genuinely helped me and share their responses, share their resources with me, and give me their support. But in a very short span of time, in one semester in a course, I started to doubt whether I was managing the competition, since I could feel that the students collaborated because they wanted to win.
Well, the fact that you are talking about your own teaching practice, that's very, very valuable. So we really can learn from that. Let me come back to what Márta said at the beginning, when you made the distinction between cooperation competition at individual level and group level. Could we come to a conclusion, maybe that's a simplification, that we should strengthen cooperation within the group, but at the same time we teach competition through making groups to compete? Or that's too simple?
That is one existing phenomenon, that if you make groups compete, that most of the time strengthens cooperation within the group. But at the same time, imagine a football team. They have to cooperate highly in order to win against the other team. But at the same time, among the footballers within the group, there is competition. Who is able to kick the goal or more goals, or who is the goal star or whatever. And at the same time, they have to be able to keep this competitive drive under control, in the sense that they still have to pass the ball to the teammate, otherwise the team may lose. And in fact, the biggest conflicts come within football teams from this, that if there are competitors within the group and they miss, for instance, help the other teammate because they don't want the other teammate to get ahead, the competition within themselves. So, but on the other hand, this competition, if it is under control, and if they don't give up the leading principle of cooperation within the group, this competition can enhance the group's performance as well. Because if the members are competing within the group in a constructive way, that enhances and improves everybody within the group, meaning that the group will be stronger compared to the other group. So, and what you say, that within the group there is always, within a cooperative group, there is always competition as well. For instance, we can be competitors. Who is a better cooperator? You see that Márta, she really shares. You see, the teacher says, she really shares with the group mates. And I feel, wow, I am the best group person in the group. And then the other student may say, but I also share, you see. So you can encourage this kind of cooperative competition, you see, or competition around cooperation, or competition around who is helping more the less able students, you see. This has a highly constructive results, but it is competition. So that's why it is very important to identify what is the competition about. And if the competition is about who is a more human, more caring person, we will become all more human and more caring and more cooperative. And it's competition, okay? So just...
At this point, if you agree, maybe we could open the conversation to the audience. So I am encouraging you to ask questions, but not only ask questions, but also bring in related personal experiences, make comments on what you heard. So I wonder who has question, comment, or interesting personal story.
Hi, thank you for the presentation or talk. I have a question about whether you have had a research with efficiency of collaborative learning, because what I have experienced personally, that usually if you collaborate, it delays things, it's just inefficient. And also the second thing is how you can be collaborative without showing your competitiveness to your peers. Does that make sense, the two questions? Yeah, thanks.
Is it possible that we collect 2 or 3 questions and comments? Okay. Now let's have one more and then we stop for a moment.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much also for this discussion. I would like to ask Aisi about, you mentioned a high school competition, and if you remember or if you can recall your earlier childhood, like primary school and maybe kindergarten, how was the situation different or similar? And the second question is, if you think that today in China, is it different from the years of your high school years, or if you know anything about it? So if you compare competition now, what you find at schools in China, in high school or whatever, and then back when you were young. Sorry, young, but at school. Okay.
So let's stop here and we shall come back to further question after we listen to the answers to these questions. The research question maybe that was mainly targeted to Márta.
I didn't do research myself on this, but German researchers, for instance, did a very interesting research. There are these competitions in Germany and in many other countries, innovation competition. And they studied for several years what kind of, who wins the competition, okay? And they found that sometimes it's an individual, sometimes it's a group that wins the competition. And then they looked at also all the other participants, all those who entered the competition, and they did interviews with the winning teams, for instance, if it was a group, and also those teams who were in the competition but didn't win. And then they tried to set up what did they learn from these interviews, what is the most effective. And they found that when it comes to groups, of course the group have to cooperate, but they found that those groups were, from the interview, they identified that the cooperation was a kind of surface level cooperation. So they kind of behaviorally, they cooperated because they met several times, they discussed several times, but in fact, they didn't really cooperate with each other, then they didn't win. So if the cooperation was a true collaboration, you know that there is a difference between cooperation and collaboration. So collaboration is really when you work together. So those were the winning teams. And what they found, that basically the most effective individual work, when you don't have to wait for the other one to understand what you already understand, or the others don't delay you, or the cooperation, which means finding the time, which means sitting together. So lots of time devoted to circumstances, you see, if the cooperation doesn't delay you. So the individual work is very effective, and the true collaboration. And if cooperation is kind of lousy, just taking up your time, wasting your time, you are sitting there, nobody really pays attention, in a way you are there, but otherwise you are not really there, you are not willing to share, you are not willing to really work together with the others, or you let somebody do the work, and you are just there as a kind of decoration, but this means group work, then it was really not effective, and these kind of groups never won the competition. And therefore, the teachers, for instance, when they set up such tasks, they really have to make sure, you see, that it is not this kind of lousy cooperation, but they really have to be able to teach collaboration. Otherwise, it's better to work alone. So group work is not always advantageous. Group work can be really disadvantageous and much worse than doing something alone. So that's...
Will you react to the question? Or maybe you want to react to that one as well?
I just a quick response to here, because I don't do research, but I teach, and like I said, I use a lot of group works. So one of the myths of group work, it was exactly what Márta said, what exactly happened in the group. And usually as an instructor, as a teacher, it's hard to know exactly the dynamics within the group. So personally, I try using peer assessment during group work, which return with really useless data, because the students were really shy to criticize, you know, the group mates. So eventually what happened is, in a really lousy collaboration group, one member just shoulder most of the responsibilities. So I think from an instructor's point of view, usually a genuine good group work return with something that's, I would call it creative or innovative, when they have an idea that's relatively new, that hasn't been talked about. And when I asked them, how did you come up with this? Usually it was because they said, oh, we had a long discussion and we disagree with each other. And that was how the learning happened. But for me as an instructor, efficiency, I don't know, dynamics is really important, but it's hard to really know in like genuinely what happened. You did, right? So I, early childhood to primary school, do I remember anything? I would say I do. When I was in primary school, there was still the selection examination at the end of primary school. So now that has been cancelled, because it's seen as quite inhumane to test the 12-year-olds and assign them to do tracking so early on. But when I was in school, that was the case. So for example, in the primary school I went to, there were three classes about 180 students in total in the whole grade, 3 classes, 180 students. Only the top 3 could go to the middle school that I went to. Yes. So, so that was the kind of competition very early on. But my memory about that competition was more about individual. I think partly because of the developmental process. That was like, you know, pre-teenager, early teen. Much of the time was still with my family instead of with friends, trying to, you know, develop my social circles, my socialization. So that kind of memory was mostly about like learning with my family, my parents' help, rather than a group learning. But yes, competition existed because of the exit exam, a highly selective exam. These days, current days, I haven't been back to China in the past 5 years. But my impression from talking to the students, to my colleagues, to my family in China, I feel that the competition is a lot more fierce than it was. In a way, it was strange, because when I went to the university was still highly selective. And the year after me, the number doubled, because the percentage increased. And then from then onwards, every year there were about 5 or 6 million of the cohort were admitted to universities. So the logic would be the competition should be relaxed. But then I think part of the reason is the exit after the university or after high school. What are the upward social mobilities? What are the opportunities afterwards that has become more restricted? And therefore that drives the competition. And from what I see, the middle school I graduated, when I was there, when I was a student there, we talk about, Beida, Tsinghua, these top universities in China. That would be the ultimate goal. Now I look, it's about going into Ivy League and Oxford, Cambridge. And that was the number driving the high school. And Marta asked me about the Jiwa. What was Jiwa? And I started to look into the word, and I realized so many of my friends in China are a part of this group that's trying to invest heavily in their children from early on so that they can stand out in the competition. And so I would say it is the competition has become more fierce. But I don't know about the collaboration. What I feel is the opportunities are shrinking, are being more restricted, and that drives the competition in the school level.
Shouldn't we mention the Tanping phenomenon in this context?
Tanping? lying flat. The whole table of Chinese students are already laughing.
The English expression only,
lying flat.
Okay.
If you don't know, there's a very trendy word called 躺平. I think the Chinese PhD students can explain that a lot better than I do. So it means you just give up. Give up on the competition, give up on the progress, and just lying flat with no motivation, intrinsic motivation to move upward.
Further question? Yeah? Yang?
Thank you.
Thierry?
I like to hear more about competition among the siblings. Yes, maybe from Professor Márta, but I'm not sure if you have siblings for Aisi. So what I observe from myself, my personal experience, and my classmates, colleagues, peers, for example, in my family, I'm the eldest among my siblings, and I would say I'm the champion from the perspective of my parents. So it gave me confidence, and I never seek for validation from my teachers. But among my colleagues and friends and classmates, every time I see someone who seems to be trying too hard and looking for the external validation too much, then when I know more about their family life, there is always a rival among their siblings. Is there any correlation between these? I don't know. And what's the effect of these competition among the siblings on the classroom life?
I didn't do research focusing on this, but I had research where we asked, normally, of course, in the demographics, we always ask, do you have brothers or sisters, and how many? And also, I ask, where are you in the birth order, okay? But at the beginning of my research, when I paid attention to this, and we tried to see if there is any kind of correlation between birth order, gender of the siblings, and so on, we didn't find basically any. So we didn't find that, let's say, the child who is the firstborn is more competitive, or the child who is the younger one is more competitive, or if the same gender siblings are there, then they are more competitive than if it is different gender. Because, and my explanation to this non-correlation was that each family has a different dynamic. And in one family, the firstborn is somebody who really fulfills the parents' kind of expectations and has a kind of unquestionable position. But in another family, this is not the case. You are a boy, but you were born after 3 girls. Then you get a very special position in the family as the only boy. Or if there are 4 girls, then who is where? So very different dynamics, what kind of child fulfills what kind of expectations of the family. Also, there is a very interesting research about families where there are same sex children with small age difference. This can go to the direction to increase competition among the siblings because they can compare in many ways because they are same sex and because the age difference is not big, so they are rather similar to each other. And the more similar you are, the more comparison can be done. But it can go to the reverse direction, and it is called sibling differentiation, that you want to be different from your sibling, not to be compared so easily. And then if you want to be different, then you find different areas. And if you have different areas where you define yourself and that is accepted in the family that, okay, Márta is really good at languages, but X and Y is really good at natural sciences, then you have different pathways and then less comparison, you see, because and this is my territory, that is your territory. So you don't know what kind of dynamic is going in the family, so you cannot simply predict that same gender, small age difference will be really very strong competition, or differentiation and less competition. So that's what I can say, that it's a very complex issue, and each family has different competitive. But for sure, compared to a one child growing up in a family, if a child is growing up in a family where there are brothers and sisters, then there is a social dynamic among them and a lot of competition around many things. And we analyze interviews with mothers with Judith, and what we noticed, that we asked, when was the first time you noticed that your child is competing, at what age? And if it is a one child, then the mothers say a way much higher age, because within the family, you see, there is no one to compete with, or sometimes, of course, children ask the parent to compete with them, but it's much later. But if they have several children, then the answer is almost like from birth. You see, when did you notice your child is competing? Oh, from a very early age. So if there are more children in the family, then it's right away visible for the mother. If it's only one child, then it comes. For instance, I noticed when he went to kindergarten, because then there are other kids. Or when we really started to be in the playground and the mother could observe the child, one child playing with other kids. But within the family, it's visible very early. So if
Do you want to react to this question, or?
No.
Okay.
I'm the only child.
Young wanted to ask something.
Yes, thanks for sharing, and actually similar as a serious question, but it's maybe more broader. I'm wondering how Hungarian family this competitive education, because take my personal experience, at least in my generation, and I think we are the same. So in China, we have a saying, if translated into English, it's like children from the other family are always the best. Like your parents compare you with your neighbors' children, your parents' close friends' children. And I myself also, like, even though I am championing my parents' environment, but they never speak highly or, how to say, praise on what I achieved. Like in their eyes, I can always be better. There's no the best. And now sometimes I'm kidding with my parents. It's really depends on the personality. Sometimes the competitive is better, and some children need the collaborative. And I said I have a big heart. That's why I never, how to say, like, fell down with your words. It's really hurt when I grew up, I feel. And also, when I was young, I always do the horizontal comparative. And actually, it's unhealthy one. Gradually, I realized it's not right. So now I'm doing as you shared, how you comment on your students. I'm doing the vertical comparison with myself. But meanwhile, also compare with others. But not what as my parents did. Use my drawbacks to compare with the other children's advantages. So yes, I'm wondering how Hungarians' parents educate their children.
I think that comparing your child is kind of very natural for parents and especially for mothers. I had a research long ago about mothers' competition through their children. You see, and the title of the article, what we wrote with a Finnish colleague, was I don't compete, but other mothers do, because they said that I don't compare and I don't compete. But yes, the other mothers, they always compare, and I don't like it. So it's very interesting that it is always the other mother, then you must be included in that kind of group. But anyway, I think parents do this kind of comparison because they think they motivate their child with that. So most of the time, I mean, of course, there can be parents who do this because they really want to destroy the self-confidence of their children, because there are destructive parents, unfortunately. But most of the time, parents do this because they want to encourage their child by setting an example or a positive comparison to do more. And it's a very interesting question if this works or not, or with what kind of child does this work and what kind of child this doesn't work. Because personally, Gabor wants always personal examples. So I was a very good student. But when I was like 9 years old, I had a teacher, and I don't know why, once we were walking together in the street from school together with this teacher, and this teacher told me, Márta, you are a very diligent student, but unfortunately you are not smart. And this is what she told me. And this was a sentence that stayed with me all in my life. And I think I achieved my achievements because I thought that this is not something what I want. I want to prove that I am also smart, not only diligent, you see? So maybe she did the best thing with me, what she could do, because this is what she said. And in our school, at that time, there was this experiment to teach English. It was not a regular thing in the Hungarian primary schools to teach English, but in that school, there was this experimental class. And they chose the smartest students from the school to enter this class. And I was not chosen. And I was really, really upset, and then continued to learn very well. And then from the whole school, 2 years later, I was the only child or student who was accepted to the experimental class 2 years later, because they said that she's so good that she has to attend that. So I got such a motivation from this sentence that, so it could have been the reverse, you see, that she says, Márta, you are diligent, but you are not smart, and then I feel, okay, then diligence is not appreciated, and I am not smart, so why on earth to work hard, or I can just get by, you see, or lose my self-confidence. But I got really such angry at her and thought that, no, this is not okay. So what I can't answer you when a parent's positive comparison finally motivates the child, and when a parent's positive comparison demotivates the child.
You want to react to this?
Yeah, it's. Can you hear me? Yep. Just to add on to Martha, so one thing I have learned about when I was in Britain, in Oxford, was the word good enough. You know, good enough. So when I was in business school in China, that was something that would be frowned upon, that kind of attitude. When you say, 差不多就行了, you know, just about right, good enough. So your instructors will say, that is why Chinese businesses are losing out, that kind of attitude. So that kind of attitude and perceptions really drove the students to, to excel, to be excellent, and to look around and compare with each other. The problem is when you reach the PhD, your doctoral stage, and you try to do that, you risk never finishing your thesis because it might be never good enough. And at some point, my supervisor told me, it's good enough, you should stop. So don't aim for perfection. And throughout my schooling in China, perfection being really, really as good as it could be had been one aim and one motivation driving the learning. But then suddenly someone told me, it's good enough, you should just let it go. And that was a eye-opening moment for me, that kind of comparison. You compare, you think, that's good enough. You compare to the criteria, it's good enough. You should stop. Move on.
So maybe we could have one more question if there is any. There are two questions. Okay, let's have two questions.
Hello, okay. I have two questions. Are the Hungarians tend to be collaborative or competitive? And I have also the same question from Aisi in the Chinese context. Are the Chinese tend to be competitive or cooperative? And the second question is how to deal with destructive cooperation and destructive competition in work setting based on your personal experience. And to elaborate my question, I think to some extent the most Asians sitting here might agree that we Asians like to invade other people's privacy and comment on it publicly. For example, in my country, I'm from Mongolia, and in my country, we like to tear the competitor down, apart. We like to tear the person apart by commenting on negatively. For example, you could have worn a longer skirt, or you could have worn less makeup, or you could have paid more attention. So I think this is a quite strategic and invisible way of tearing the opponent down, and to making someone insecure is, it's easy to destroy someone. So how to deal with this destructive cooperation and destructive competition in a work setting?
So we have two questions from Bimba. The first one is about how Hungarians, Chinese are. That's always challenging for me when I get such a question, because I think that, for instance, I have much more common in my thinking with you, Bimba, than with my neighbor. So I don't know how Hungarians are. But yeah. You are answering.
You asked, are Hungarians cooperative or competitive? What I would like to emphasize with all this, what we were speaking about, it is not or. It is not or. The better question would be more competitive or more cooperative, because competition and cooperation are all around. I mean, in the most competitive society, you cannot live without cooperation, you see? I mean, you cannot handle the society if citizens are not cooperative. For instance, cooperative in keeping the law, cooperative keeping the rules of the traffic, cooperative when they do an operation, you see? when they have to carry out a building construction, you see. Cooperation and competition are present in all societies, so we cannot say either or, okay? So it's like what is more characteristic or more prevalent, and within that, what kind of cooperation is more characteristic and what kind of competition is more characteristic. And I would say that Hungarians are not very good cooperators, if this is a good word. So really, they are better individually working, or more tend toward competing with each other, but not so good at cooperation, I would say. I don't know how you would answer this in terms of the Chinese, we will see. And going to the very important issue, what can you do with destructive competition, for instance, in a workplace? Of course, when it is already there, that's something. But if you are a manager, or if you have a position where you can influence this from the beginning, then I think the most important is to be explicit about what kind of, that competition and cooperation are both there, unavoidably there in a workplace. So what kind of principles in this workplace we want to apply in relation to competition, and explicitly say that, for instance, it is not acceptable to try to get ahead by denigrating your colleague. So the group is going to monitor, and as a manager, I ask all of you not to let this happen. You can get ahead by doing a better job. You can get ahead emphasizing your strengths, but you cannot get ahead emphasizing the weaknesses of your colleague with whom you have to cooperate. Because the moment you start to do this, you will get it back. And I'm sorry, I have to use both of my hands. Can you keep it for me? So you can do this like this. I push you down, but this guy will not be happy being pushed down, so wants to push you down. And then you pushed you down and you push you down. Is this good in a workplace? So what is better, that I go ahead, and I don't like that you got ahead, so I also want to go ahead, and also want to go ahead. Is this good for a workplace? So the manager really has to be explicit about this and set up these kind of principles, not because necessarily everybody will keep it, but if they don't keep it, at least everybody will know that now we don't keep it. And that's a regulatory principle. Now, already when there is destructive competition going on, that's a more difficult thing, because then how can you turn it around? Because if I am pushed down in an unfair way by a colleague of mine, as you can imagine, there is a very natural instinct, let's put it that way, that I am going to do revenge. Okay? And I also want to push that down, or I try to defend myself or protect myself, meaning that we are not concentrating on work, but we are, at least partially, we are concentrating on the destructive dynamic among us, which is really bad. But if I don't react to the destructive act of my colleague, I can be seen weak. I can be seen vulnerable. And unfortunately, there are destructive competitor people, and those people don't stop if you don't retaliate. They just think, okay, she's really weak, let's go on. So they continue. So not reacting doesn't save you. Revenge escalates the process. So it's very difficult what you can do, because passivity or activity both can result in increasing the distraction. So many times, if it is a really bad destructive relationship, I used to advise quit. If you can do, of course, you cannot do that always. Just go, get out from the situation, because you cannot do good. Even if you don't react, the destruction will continue. If you react, then there will be a continuous fight. So, but sometimes you cannot get out from the situation. Then, of course, you can always try to include the group. So it is not going on just between two colleagues, a destructive process, but it is put into the open, because then the group can have a kind of controlling effect or a monitoring effect. But to do that, you have to be brave, you have to be confident, and you have to get advice from somebody how to manage that situation when it is put out into the open, because that can gain you help. And you are not, then you are not alone, but it's the group's kind of shared responsibility to handle the destructive process. Of course, the manager as well should be involved in that.
So first question about are Chinese more cooperative or competitive? I agree with Márta, it's very difficult to answer at the general level of the whole population, especially there are 1.3 billion of us. And I would refer to what Márta mentioned at the start. It depends on what's happening. Is there a goal? Is there other activities that's driving the collaboration or cooperation or both? I would say it depends. It depends on the individual, the organization, the situation. So it's a much context or situation dependent question that I cannot answer very quickly. What I can say from my experience is in urgent situations, in the situations, for example, of a disaster, Chinese tend to be highly collaborative and cooperative, both. So that's a one thing through the modern history that there were so many witnesses accounts that could testify to that. But at the general population level, I cannot answer that question. And the second question, I also agree with Márta. So if you have one instance of destructive competitive behavior, it's an instance. You may refer to HR, you may refer to internal processes if you wish, which you should, because so it can be documented. Or you can respond at your personal level to say, do not do that or do not say that. However, if it is a repetitive incident, then it may be an organizational culture. And that is the point. You should consider whether you stay or quit. And I agree with Márta that my advice will be, if that's not the kind of organizational culture you want to be in, you should leave. That's all.
Maybe we could also mention here what we were talking about when we were sitting there at the table, that there is a third behavior, neither cooperation nor competition, so avoid both.
Gabor, we were talking about China and India, because our, in general, the Chinese-Indian relationship is a bit funny and a bit awkward. So I cited an Indian-Canadian comedian in his stand-up comedy. In one episode, he said, we can work next to each other, but we can't work with each other, and we cannot work against each other. We can coexist. We acknowledge each other's existence, and that's all.
We can allow one last question. Few, I think you wanted to ask something.
Hello. Okay, so I thank you for your wonderful insights, and I want to ask a question related to the research, because Professor Márta says she has already done lots of research on competition and collaborative. So my doctoral thesis is based on assessment for learning. So since assessment for learning is kinder, emphasizing on peer assessment or collaborative performances. So have you ever done any research related to assessment for learning with these two terms?
No, I didn't. Although my co-teacher and I, just this past January, after we taught one course, we were thinking of writing a paper based on the teaching that we did, because we saw things quite differently. He's new to the school. He came in, and the first thing he said to me after the first class was, "This class is so competitive," which go back to what I said. I try to tone down the competitiveness in the curriculum, but a new instructor came in and said, "This is too competitive." So we started to talk about it, but we haven't done it.
Okay, thank you.
Well, as a person interested in action and intervention and things like that, I would have a last question to both of you. If you had to give an advice on the basis of what we were talking about to three different kind of person: a teacher, a leader, which could be a school leader or a head of department, and a politician, a minister of education, on this topic. So what kind of advice would you give to these different kind of persons about how to cope with, how to manage, how to use competition, cooperation in education? So that's a little bit connected to what Wimber was asking about how to intervene when there is bad competition, but this is broader.
I don't think I would give very different kind of advice to the three different people. I have been doing research on competition all in my life, really. So I would say that competition should be taught, should be socialized, and should be very much part of the educational context. Teacher should apply competition, but like sports trainers or sports coaches, who in sports people participate in competitions all the time, because sports, I mean competitive sport, is about competition. And they really have to teach how to be in it, how to rely on your own capacities, how to acknowledge winning, how to acknowledge the others who are better, how to stand up from losing. So this kind of knowledge, I think, should be taught in the school, you see? And very interesting, because there is this national, what is the exact name of NAT, national curriculum, and we were asked, because I am a member of the Hungarian Academy Psychological Committee, when the new national curriculum was prepared, we got the draft, and we were able to comment on it, and we were asked, the members, to comment on it. And I was looking at it, and I looked for the words cooperation and competition, and cooperation appeared quite a number of times, but competition appeared only in relation to the physical education lessons. And I advise that it should be a part of the citizenship education, or it should be a part of the general education of each subject, how to deal with and learn about competition, and how to teach students to be constructive competitors, how to teach students to keep the rules, and why to keep the rules, why not to cheat. Because this is something that is there, that yes, you shouldn't cheat, but it is not built up into a kind of educational concept why you shouldn't cheat. So teachers react to cheating in a spontaneous way. Some say, there are Hungarian teachers, I heard myself even on television, who said that, wow, if somebody cheats and I don't notice it, then that person is really gifted. What does this say? You see that the only one thing that it counts only if I notice the cheating. If I don't notice, it's talent, it's gift. So you should cheat well, so people don't notice it. That's what they say. So teachers have really, really very confusing ideas about this, you see. So it is not part of their education how to deal with such issues, and no elaborated knowledge about this. I have different kinds of writings, and in some educational institutions, they make students learn it or read it or whatever, but still it should be part of the curriculum, and this should be coming from the Ministry of Education, first of all, and secondly, then the school principal, then the teachers. So that's.
I see. Would you make a distinction between the three positions, layers, or?
I don't have a concrete idea to give to these three positions, but I have a principle, which whatever I say, it will be based on the principle that I have, which is I am not a believer of survival of the fittest, and I'm not a believer of social Darwinism, particularly when it comes to human beings, human society. So whatever advice I would give to them, it would be based on that. For example, I will not advise the ministry to close down universities based on their revenue or based on the number of students they have. I will not advise a principal to fire a teacher because his students did not get enough awards in the Olympia. I will not advise a classroom teacher to emphasize and intensify competition, but forgetting to help the most needed student in the classroom. So that will be my principle of giving advice.
That's very interesting. You told us what kind of advice you wouldn't give. Okay, wonderful. I think that we came to the end of this program. My feeling is that we had a very, very inspiring conversation tonight. I enjoyed it very much. I hope that you did as well. A great thanks to Márta, Aisi. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.